Sometimes it's very difficult to tell if you have alopecia or what stage of alopecia that you're in or you're experiencing. And I'm here to help you with that. Hi, I'm Dr. Dwella Moten Nelson, your healthy scalp specialist. When we look at alopecia, we can break it up into so many different types of alopecia. But today we're just going to talk about how you can tell or how you can determine what stage of alopecia that you're experiencing currently. We're going to put them into two buckets. So one is going to be androgenic alopecia, which more so talks about male pattern baldness. And even though we say male pattern baldness, it can happen in men and it can happen in women as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're also going to talk about alopecia areata, which is the alopecia that forms when you have small circles on the scalp or multiple small circles on the scalp. So let's start with androgenic alopecia. So there are two different scales that we look at androgenic alopecia. There's a Norwood scale, and there's also a Ludwig scale. These two scales help you to be able to determine what stage of alopecia you are in when you're starting to experience androgenic alopecia. So let's talk about the androgenic alopecia a little bit first. That particular type of alopecia is hereditary. So if you look at your parents, your mom or your dad, and they started to thin at the top, at the crown or the top of their head when they were younger, or they started to thin over time, that is known as androgenic, which means it's caused by hormonal differences in the body. This particular alopecia is often referred to when people talk about DHT or this particular type of hormone, DHT, that causes, when you have a lot of it in your body, it causes you to lose your hair. And so the DHT is something that you see often in men. That's why they attribute it or call it male pattern baldness. And even though women do have it, but they call it male pattern baldness because it's related to testosterone in the body of men. So one of the first steps that you see or stages that you see in androgenic alopecia, right around the hairline, you'll start to see the hair be a lot more sparse around the hairline. Then eventually the very crown of the head, sometimes you'll still have hair right above the brow line, but the very crown of the head will start to decrease in thickness of hair. Eventually the hairline and the crown of the head, those two bare areas will start to move into each other, if you will, and you'll start to lose hair in that whole area on the crown of the head. Usually make somewhat of a horseshoe shape where the hair will start to come out or you'll start to lose hair. So eventually, if that is not treated, if you are not trying to do something to reverse the effect of that type of alopecia, eventually all of the hair in the crown of the head will completely come out, and also the follicles will go dormant and your hair will not grow any longer on the top of your head. So it's always best, if you're starting to see your hair thin, if you're able to see your scalp through your hair is getting much thinner, it's always better to start treating that scalp condition or that hair loss as soon as it happens. When you wait for a long time and your hair starts to get thinner and thinner over years, then eventually you don't have hair. It's much, much harder to get that hair to start to grow again than it is to try to get that hair to just to maintain your hair growth as opposed to restart it again. So we always recommend that if you're starting to see your hair thinning, if you're starting to see your hairline recede backwards, if you're starting to see bald spot or starting to see your hair much thinner at the crown of your head, then you should start treatment or start seeking help at that point. Don't wait until all of your hair has completely come out or you've lost all of your hair in the top of your head before you start looking for help. So that's the first one that we'll talk about, the androgenic alopecia, which is the male pattern baldness. Now moving more into the alopecia areata, there are about 4 specific stages when you kind of look at alopecia areata. And alopecia areata just means that you have little small circles that show up on the scalp and there's no hair growing in that little small circle. So it's very different, of course, than the androgenic type, which eventually all of the hair over the top of the head eventually comes out. But with alopecia areata, you have one small circle. Eventually that circle will grow and expand, and over time you may get another small circle. And as that circle starts to grow and expand, they will grow into each other. So the first stage is when you have a singular area of baldness or singular bald spot that's on the scalp. That's your stage 1 for alopecia areata. Stage 2 would be when you see 2 or 3 areas on the scalp that have bald spots, and that means you have multiple bald spots on the scalp. That's your stage 2 for alopecia areata. As those bald spots start to increase and more hair starts to come out in that area, it looks like that bald spot will start to expand. Essentially, you're losing more and more hair in that circular region. So as you're losing more and more hair, those bald spots will start to grow into each other, meaning that the little small spots that were separated at one point, now they're much bigger and they're touching each other and starting to take up more of the scalp, making more of the scalp become bald at that point. That's your second and your third phase. One thing that people that have alopecia areata have noticed and reported is that they start to sometimes lose hair on other parts of their bodies. So you will see people that have a spot on their leg where they had hair on their leg, or they had hair up under their arms. Those things like that you don't really talk about as much, but you still tend to lose that hair on the body, not just on the scalp, but it can be on other parts of the body. In the end stage, of course, there's a alopecia called alopecia totalis, which is when you lose all of the hair all over your entire body. So your eyebrows, many people will lose their eyebrows, they'll lose their mustache and beard, so it can affect the entire body. So I hope that helps you to understand the difference between the androgenic and also the alopecia areata, but also to help you to understand the stages. And there is a difference between alopecia and hair loss. As we age, there are a couple of things that we can't change. Is we can't change our age and we can't change our genetic makeup. So genetically, your body is going to behave probably most like your mom and your dad. And then as we age, our hair will not be as thick or as full or as long as it was when we were younger. And so with those two things in mind, we can't change those things, but we can watch our hair and make sure that it's as healthy as possible. And so when you're starting to see some hair loss may not be alopecia. So when people see their hair coming out, they'll mention, oh, I saw hair in the shower. Every single day we're going to shed hair. So that's very normal, shedding between 50 and 100 strands of hair every single day. Very, very natural. People go through that all the time. It's not anything unusual. But when you start to see round spots on the scalp that are not growing hair, or when you start to see the top of your husband or your wife's hair and you can see her scalp through her hair, when you start to notice those things, those are more in line with alopecia and not just hair loss. So we want to make sure we're also differentiating between those two. So I hope that this was helpful to you. When you're experiencing alopecia, and if it's the early stages of alopecia, we always recommend that you start treating as early as possible. And Dr. TopicOils can help with that. We offer what's called the Dr. TopicOils Nutritive Scalp Elixir. You can buy that along with a derma roller. We'll link it down below for you to pick up, to start using on your hair to get your bald spots to come in. Also, for people that have thinning hair, if you have curly hair and you're finding that it's getting thin, Alopecia Repair Balm. We'll also link that for you as well. That is made with sulfur. So if you just have thinning, no bald spots, no round spots on the scalp where you're seeing that your hair is bald and you're just wanting your hair to grow thicker, your ground cover is what I call it, your ground cover to be thicker, Dr. TopicOils Alopecia Repair Balm is perfect for that. But again, like I said, if you have bald spots, you want to use the Nutritive Scalp Elixir along with our derma roller. And both of those are linked for you. Again, thank you so much for your time. This is Dr. Dwella Moten Nelson, your healthy scalp specialist.